Let's start with Uncharted 4. This is one of those games that grabs you from the very first moment. If you've played any of the previous Uncharted games, you know what to expect. Action, adventure, treasure hunts, and a lot of intense moments. But Uncharted 4 just hits differently. It feels like a perfect blend of everything we loved about the series, but with a more mature, reflective tone. Nathan Drake is back, and this time, he's facing his greatest challenge yet. What's really cool is that the game dives deeper into his personal life, showing a side of Nathan we don't usually see. He's older, more settled, and you can tell he's trying to move on from his treasure hunting days. But of course, things don't stay quiet for long. The game does a great job of building up that tension between wanting to leave the past behind and being pulled back in. It's something that feels relatable, even if we're not all globe-trotting adventurers. The visuals in this game are absolutely stunning. Whether you're scaling cliffs in Scotland or exploring ancient ruins in Madagascar, everything looks so incredibly detailed. Sometimes, I would just stop for a moment to take in the scenery, which is something I don't usually do in action games. The environments feel alive, and they draw you into the story in a way that makes it feel like you're watching a movie, but also in control of the action. Speaking of the action, Uncharted 4 nails the gameplay. The combat, the platforming, and even the puzzle solving all feel smooth and satisfying. Next we have Assassin's Creed Unity. I know it got some heat when it first came out, but these days it's actually kind of a hidden gem. Paris during the French Revolution is just incredible. The city feels so alive with all the chaos of that time period. People rioting in the streets, vendors yelling, revolutionaries everywhere. You really feel like you're in the middle of it all. What I love most about Unity is the detail in the city. The way they've recreated Notre Dame and all the landmarks is just breathtaking. I mean, it's Paris. Who wouldn't want to explore every nook and cranny? Arno, the main character, gives off that classic Assassin's Creed vibe, but he's a bit more relatable. He's got this personal revenge story going on, which feels pretty typical for AC, but with the revolution happening around him, it adds a lot more tension. And the whole romance thing with Elise, I thought it was a nice touch, gave the story more depth. And let's talk parkour. The parkour in Unity is easily the best in the series. It just feels so smooth. Running through the narrow streets, climbing up buildings, it's like you can feel every jump and movement. Escaping guards or just free running across rooftops never gets old. The customization is a major highlight too. You can kit Arno out with different outfits, weapons, and abilities. Whether you want to go full stealth or just dive into combat, it's totally up to you. The freedom to shape how you play is awesome. Oh, and the co-op missions. I had so much fun with those. Running heists with friends, trying to coordinate attacks. It's pure chaos in the best way. Nothing goes to plan, but it's hilarious when it doesn't. Next we have Cyberpunk 2077. I know it had a rocky start, but seriously, it's a totally different game now after all the updates. The world of Night City is just wow. I mean, if you love getting lost in a huge, neon-lit, gritty open world, this game is perfect. It feels alive, you know? The city's got this cyberpunk vibe down to a T. Dark alleys, giant holograms, futuristic cars, the whole Blade Runner kind of thing. And honestly, I love how the game doesn't shy away from showing the messier side of that world, like the clash of high-tech and low-life. V, the main character, is super customizable too. I spent way too much time tweaking my character at the start, like more than I'd care to admit. But it's fun to play with all the different builds, whether you want to go full-on hacker, cybernetic brawler, or sneaky assassin. Plus, the augmentations, dude, that's the coolest part. You can literally replace parts of your body with cybernetic enhancements. Who wouldn't want a built-in katana arm or optic implants? What's crazy is how the story can change depending on what you do. Like, the choices really feel like they matter. There was this one mission where I was trying to decide whether to help these corporate types or betray them, and man, I was stressing over it for days. I couldn't stop thinking, what if I made the wrong choice? But that's the fun of it. There's no right or wrong answer, just how you want to play it. I will say the driving can be a little wonky at times, but honestly, once you get used to it, it's not that bad. Plus, the city's so massive, it's fun just cruising around, taking in the sights. Next, we have The Last of Us. Oh man, where do I even begin? You know how some games just stick with you long after you've finished them? That's exactly what The Last of Us did for me. It's so emotionally charged. Like, I knew it was going to be intense, but it's even more than I expected. Joel and Ellie's relationship? It's not just a typical protect the girl storyline. They feel like real people with real flaws. I think that's what I loved most, how raw and human it all feels. You watch them grow together in this messed up world, and it's not always pretty, but it's real. Speaking of the world, the post-apocalyptic setting is both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Naughty Dog nailed that feeling of dread when you're walking through those overgrown cities. It's eerie, especially with the sound design. The clickers? Man, every time I heard them my heart rate went up. And they're not even the worst part. The humans in this game? Sometimes they're scarier than the infected. But honestly, it's the quieter moments that hit me the hardest. There's this one scene with Ellie in the giraffe sequence that made me just stop and take it in. In a world where everything's falling apart, there are still these tiny glimpses of beauty, you know? It makes you think about how people hold on to hope, even in the worst situations. Gameplay-wise, it's super tight. There's this constant balance of stealth, action, and scavenging. But what I appreciated most was how every encounter felt like it had stakes. You don't always have enough resources to just go guns blazing, so you've got to be smart about how you handle situations. Next we have Doom 4. This game brought back the old-school shooter in the best way possible, but still didn't take home the Game of the Year award. And I'm still scratching my head over that, because Doom was an absolute beast when it dropped. It was like ID Software said, let's show everyone how a real first-person shooter is done. First of all, Doom nailed the pacing. It was fast, chaotic, and brutal. Everything you want in a Doom game. They took that classic run-and-gun formula and cranked it up to 11. You're constantly moving, jumping, and tearing through demons like a one-man wrecking crew. The combat was a symphony of destruction, where stopping meant death. And let's not forget the glory kills, where you get rewarded for ripping apart demons up close in the most satisfying ways possible. The thing that made Doom stand out was how unapologetically old school it was. No cover mechanics, no reloading, just pure adrenaline-fueled action. It felt like a return to form for the genre. And in a sea of shooters that were leaning more toward tactical, slow-paced gameplay, Doom was like a wake-up call. It reminded everyone why the original Doom was such a phenomenon back in the day. Why it didn't win Game of the Year. One reason could be that it released in a pretty stacked year. 2016 had Overwatch taking a lot of the spotlight, and multiplayer shooters were all the rage. Doom, on the other hand, was a more solo-focused experience. Sure, it had a multiplayer mode, but that's not what people played it for. It was all about that single-player campaign. Next we have Days Gone. I'll admit, when I first heard about it, I wasn't expecting too much, but once I started playing, I got hooked. It's one of those open-world games where you get so lost in the world that hours just fly by. And let's be real, who doesn't love a good post-apocalyptic story with zombies? Or I guess freakers in this case. The thing that stands out to me the most is the world itself. Oregon, but post-apocalyptic. It's both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. You're riding your bike through these gorgeous landscapes, like snow-capped mountains and dense forests, but you know danger is lurking around every corner. It's such a cool mix of peaceful and intense. I remember just cruising down the highway at sunset, only to get ambushed by a freaker horde or a pack of wolves out of nowhere. Speaking of the bike, Days Gone really makes it feel like your best friend. I know it sounds weird, but you're constantly upgrading it, maintaining it, and using it to get out of some really tight spots. Running out of gas in the middle of nowhere, with freakers closing in, is one of those moments where you're like, okay, this is serious. But when you've got your bike tuned up and ready to go, it's an absolute blast to just ride through the wilderness, wind in your hair, dodging obstacles and escaping enemies. And then there's Deacon. I didn't expect to get so attached to his story, but as the game went on, I really started to feel for the guy. The freaker hordes, though, insane. The first time you run into one, it's pure panic. I'm talking hundreds of freakers coming at you all at once, and you have to figure out how to take them down, or just run for your life. Next we have Mafia Definitive Edition. Alright, so I just finished this game, and honestly, I'm still processing how good it was. You know when a game just sticks with you? That's how this one feels. I've always had a soft spot for the original Mafia, but this remake? Wow, they really outdid themselves. It's like stepping into the 1930s for real. First off, the atmosphere. I don't know how they nailed the vibe of that era so perfectly. The city of Lost Heaven is just alive. Every little detail, from the cars to the buildings to the music, it really pulls you into that world. There were moments when I just wanted to drive around and take it all in, not even worrying about the mission at hand. Like, who knew 1930s radio stations would get me this hyped? And the story, it's not just a typical mobster narrative. You really get invested in Tommy Angelo's rise in the Salieri crime family. It's like playing through one of those classic gangster movies, but you're in control. I actually found myself sympathizing with him, which is wild considering, he's a criminal. But the voice acting, the facial expressions, it's all so believable. It draws you into the point where you care about these characters, even when they're making some seriously bad choices. Gameplay-wise, it's got that nice balance between action and story. Sure, there are shootouts and car chases, but I think what got me hooked was how well-paced it all felt. It doesn't rush you. The combat feels more polished this time around too. And the driving? I never thought I'd say this, but driving those old-school cars was actually fun. Next we have Stray. When I first saw this game, I thought it was just going to be a charming little game where you play as a cat, exploring a futuristic city. But as I spent more time with it, I discovered it's so much more than that. It's like stepping into an emotional adventure through the eyes of a stray cat navigating a post-apocalyptic world. First off, being a cat in a video game feels surprisingly freeing. There's something deeply satisfying about hopping across rooftops, squeezing through tight spaces, and knocking over random objects just for the fun of it. The game nails the physicality of a cat. Every move feels so fluid and lifelike. It makes you think about how the world looks from their perspective, so close to the ground, yet always agile and in control. The world building in Stray is amazing. It's this blend of cyberpunk and decay, full of neon lights and towering buildings, but also a deep sense of isolation. The city itself feels alive, not in the way you'd expect, but more like it's holding its breath. You meet these small robots along the way, and they're oddly human in their interactions with you, despite being machines. They add a lot of heart to the game. There's a sense of community among them, and you can't help but feel drawn into their lives. The story unravels slowly, but it's layered with meaning. It touches on themes of companionship, survival, and hope in a broken world. The bond you develop with the small drone B-12 is touching in a way I didn't expect. It's funny how a game about a cat, without any dialogue from the main character, can be this emotional. Next we have Dying Light. There's something about Dying Light that just pulls you in. It's not just another zombie game. And trust me, I've played my share. What really grabbed me when I first picked it up was the way it mixed parkour with zombie survival. I mean, you're not just running from zombies, you're vaulting over fences, climbing buildings, and pulling off these crazy fluid parkour moves that make you feel like you're actually there. It's like the city is your playground, but with the constant threat of the undead breathing down your neck. That mix of freedom and fear, it's exhilarating. And the city of Heron? It's gritty, dirty, and oozing with atmosphere. During the day, you're mostly dealing with the slow, lumbering zombies, and you start to feel kind of bold, like, yeah, I got this. You're scavenging, crafting weapons, taking out a few zombies here and there, feeling pretty good about yourself. But as soon as night falls, it's like the game flips the script. You go from being the predator to the prey. Those volatiles, they still haunt me, honestly. The first time one spotted me, I panicked and barely escaped. The night cycle adds this whole other layer of tension, making you think twice before staying out too late. One of my favorite things, though, is how the game encourages creativity. You're not just limited to using guns or blunt objects. No, you can modify weapons, throw firecrackers to distract the undead, or set traps. I remember finding a baseball bat and modding it to electrocute zombies. Next we have Black Myth Wukong. When I first heard about this game, I wasn't sure what to expect, but the moment I saw the gameplay, it completely blew me away. This game is such a breath of fresh air in the action RPG genre, blending Chinese mythology with some seriously stunning visuals. You can tell the developers at Game Science have poured their hearts into this project, and it really shows. The main thing that struck me was how alive the world feels. The environments are rich, almost dreamlike, with incredible attention to detail. Whether it's a dense forest or ancient ruins, everything feels like it has history, like it's part of this vast mythical landscape. And don't even get me started on the creature designs. Some of these enemies look straight out of Legends, but with a fresh, modern twist that makes them both terrifying and beautiful. As Wukong, you have access to a lot of cool abilities. And it's not just about fighting. There's a real sense of strategy involved. You can transform into different creatures and use their powers to outsmart enemies, which adds such a dynamic element to combat. It's not just about mashing buttons, but thinking on your feet. Every battle feels intense, like you're actually facing off against these legendary foes. But it's not all about combat. The story itself seems to be really captivating, diving deep into the lore of Journey to the West. The way the narrative is woven into the gameplay, with cutscenes and dialogue, really draws you in. Next we have Horizon Zero Dawn. You ever play a game that completely pulls you into its world and makes you forget time exists? From the very start, it hit me with its vast open world and beautiful landscapes. It's like stepping into a future where nature and machines are in this strange yet fascinating balance. The contrast of lush forests, snowy mountains, and decaying remnants of the old world just blew me away. I'd find myself stopping, not to complete a mission, but just to take in the view. What really pulled me in was Aloy, the main character. She's strong, independent, and driven, but still relatable. Her journey to uncover the truth about her past kept me hooked, and I felt a connection with her that not many games manage to achieve. Every interaction, every choice made me feel like I was walking her path, not just controlling her through a screen. The machines in Horizon are some of the most unique enemies I've ever encountered. They're massive, unpredictable, and have this alien feel to them, yet they belong perfectly in this world. Each machine required a different approach, forcing me to think and adapt. It never felt repetitive. Instead, it kept things fresh, especially when you take down something huge like a Thunderjaw. I remember the first time I did, and it felt like a massive victory. The combat made me feel like a hunter, not just a fighter, and that added a layer of depth I really appreciated. The story also has a lot going for it. There's mystery, there's emotion, and there's this haunting sense of loss throughout the game. Next we have Mad Max. So, I recently had the chance to spend some time with Mad Max, and let me tell you, it's an experience that truly stands out. The game captures the raw, gritty essence of the Mad Max universe so well that it feels like you're right in the heart of that post-apocalyptic wasteland. One of the first things that hit me was the attention to detail in the environment. The desolate landscapes and towering sandstorms are crafted with such precision that they almost feel alive. It's like every corner of the world has a story to tell, and exploring it becomes an adventure in itself. Upgrading and customizing your car, the magnum opus, is an absolute blast. There's something incredibly satisfying about tearing through enemies with a fully upgraded, heavily armed vehicle. And the thrill of high-speed chases and explosive battles really keeps you on the edge of your seat. The narrative is another strong point. Max's journey, filled with intense personal struggles and high-stakes encounters, is engaging from start to finish. It's not just about surviving, it's about finding purpose in a world that's gone mad. The characters you meet along the way, each with their own quirks and backstories, add depth to the story. What's more, the game does a great job of balancing action with exploration. There's always something to discover, whether it's hidden loot, side quests, or just interesting details in the environment. It encourages you to take your time and really soak in the world around you. The combat mechanics are solid. Next, we have Resident Evil 4 Remake. You know how remakes can sometimes feel like just a polished-up version of the original? This one is so much more than that. Capcom managed to take one of the most beloved games in the series and elevate it in all the right ways. It's like they took everything that worked in 2005 and improved it without losing that magic. Honestly, if you're a fan of the original, you're going to be thrilled. First off, the graphics are stunning. You know how the original had that eerie, creepy vibe with its isolated village? Well, the remake takes that atmosphere to a whole new level. The foggy woods, the creepy lighting, it just feels so immersive. There were moments when I had to stop and just take in the environment. It's terrifying, but in a way that makes you want to explore every corner. Gameplay-wise, I was thrilled with how much smoother everything felt. Leon's movements are less stiff, and the gunplay, spot on. The combat has been reworked to feel more dynamic, especially when you're dodging and parrying enemies. Oh, and speaking of enemies, those Ganados are way more terrifying this time around. They're more aggressive, smarter, and honestly, I found myself sweating in some of those encounters, especially when you're dealing with hordes at once. I loved the tweaks they made to the characters too. Leon has more personality. He's still got those cheesy one-liners, but he feels more grounded. Ashley is no longer just the damsel in distress. She's actually helpful, and their dynamic adds to the story in a way that feels more natural. Next, we have Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I can honestly say, it's unlike anything I've played before. Right from the beginning, it sets a tone that's dark, emotional, and deeply immersive. You can tell it's more than just an action-adventure game. There's a deeper story here, and it pulls you in with every step Senua takes on her journey. The story is so emotional, especially as it deals with mental health in such a powerful way. The way they portray Senua's psychosis, the voices in her head, it's also unsettling but fascinating at the same time. It's like you're constantly living inside her mind, and that really makes you connect with her. It's rare to see a game tackle such a heavy topic with so much respect and depth. And then there's the combat. It's intense, but it's not over the top. It feels personal. Like every fight is a struggle for survival. You're not just slashing through enemies for the sake of it. Each battle feels like it has weight, like Senua's fighting for something bigger. And the way the game makes you feel isolated, with those stunning landscapes that somehow feel both beautiful and haunting, it just adds to the experience. The audio design really stood out to me too. Wearing headphones made a huge difference. The voices surround you, whispering in your ear, sometimes confusing you, sometimes guiding you. It's such a smart use of sound to mess with your mind, making you question what's real. Just like Senua, I found myself genuinely tense during certain moments, not because of jump scares, but because of that constant feeling of unease. Next we have Metro Exodus. This game is something else. If you're into immersive worlds with deep storytelling, this one's going to grab you right from the start. I remember jumping in, and immediately I felt like I was actually there, trudging through the post-apocalyptic Russian wasteland, feeling every bit of that bleak yet oddly beautiful atmosphere. What's really cool about Metro Exodus is how it takes the series from the underground tunnels and opens it up to these massive open areas without losing that signature claustrophobic tension. You still get those tight, nerve-wracking moments where you're creeping through dark, creepy tunnels. But now, you also have these wide-open spaces that make you feel a sense of freedom and danger at the same time. There's something about walking through a desolate, snowy wasteland and then hearing the distant howl of a mutant that gets your heart racing. Artyom's journey is such an emotional one. He's not just trying to survive. He's out there searching for hope, for a place where humanity can rebuild. You can feel how much this means to him and his crew. That bond between them, especially with his wife Anna, really hit me. You're not just a lone wolf. You've got a family, a team that cares for each other, and that gives everything this extra layer of tension. You want to protect them, to keep them safe. You've got to constantly think about how you're using your resources. Do you craft more ammo, or do you focus on a new gas mask filter because the radiation's about to kill you? That balance adds a lot of strategy to the game. Next we have Skyrim. Where do you even start with a game like Skyrim? This game is just huge. It's one of those games that just keeps pulling you in, no matter how many times you've played it before. You boot it up thinking, I'll just play for an hour. And next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. and you're sneaking around in the Thieves Guild or fighting a dragon on top of a mountain. First off, the world. It's absolutely massive and it feels alive, from the snowy peaks of the Throat of the World to the rolling plains of Whiterun. Every part of Skyrim feels like it has its own story to tell, and the fact that you can go anywhere, do anything, it's such a freeing experience. Like, if you see a mountain in the distance, you can actually go there, and you never know what's going to happen along the way. Maybe you run into a giant, or you stumble upon some hidden cave with its own little quest line. It's just endless discovery. The combat, well, it's classic Skyrim. It's not about being super fancy or fast-paced, but it's about choice. You want to swing a giant axe? Go for it. Prefer sneaking around with a bow or dual-wielding daggers? Totally doable. Or maybe you want to go full wizard, summoning flames and raising the dead. Whatever your style, the game lets you play exactly how you want. And speaking of choice, the quests are insane. Sure, there's the main story about you being the Dragonborn with the whole saving the world thing. But honestly, the side quests are where it's at. You can get caught up joining the Dark Brotherhood and becoming an assassin, or leading the companions and becoming a werewolf. There's just so much to do. Next we have Rise of the Tomb Raider. This game really took me by surprise in the best way possible. I mean, I knew going in it was going to be a solid game, but it actually exceeded my expectations on so many levels. First off, the environments are stunning. Every single location feels meticulously crafted, from the frozen Siberian mountains to the hidden tombs. You really feel like you're on this epic adventure with Lara. I found myself just stopping to take in the views at times, which isn't something I do often in action games. And speaking of action, the combat and stealth mechanics are incredibly satisfying. You get this perfect blend of intense firefights, sneaky takedowns, and crafting that just keeps you engaged throughout. There's this real sense of progression, too. By the end of the game, I felt like Lara had grown so much, not just as a character, but in terms of abilities. You can craft your own explosives, improve your gear, and upgrade your skills, so it feels like you're always evolving. The game nails that feeling of being alone in the wilderness. There were plenty of moments where I felt like Lara was up against impossible odds, but her resilience kept pushing her forward. There's something really inspiring about that. It's like you're constantly in survival mode, scavenging for resources, battling enemies, and fighting the elements. I have to say, the tombs themselves are a standout. They're optional, but trust me, they're worth exploring. Some of the puzzles had me scratching my head for a while, but that moment of solving them is so satisfying. Next we have Dark Souls 3. This game is like a test of your patience, skill, and determination, but in the most rewarding way. It's tough, no doubt about it, but that's what makes it so satisfying. If you're into games that push you, Dark Souls 3 is an experience you won't forget. First off, the world. The atmosphere in this game is just something else. Every area feels heavy with history. Like the ruins and castles you walk through have seen centuries of battles and chaos. There's this haunting beauty to it, you know? You're walking through these desolate, crumbling places, but at the same time, they're gorgeous. It really pulls you in, like you just want to explore every corner, even if it means getting your ass kicked. And speaking of getting your ass kicked, the combat. Man, it's brutal. But once you get the hang of it, it's like a dance. You can't just go in swinging like in other games. Timing, dodging, and learning your enemy's moves are key. Every fight, whether it's a basic enemy or one of those insane bosses, feels like a challenge that you're either going to conquer or get humbled by. One thing I love about Dark Souls 3 is how it respects you as a player. It doesn't hold your hand or give you a bunch of tutorials. You're just thrown into this dark, dangerous world and expected to figure it out. At first, it's super intimidating, but you start picking up on little things. The lore, how the world is connected, the strategies you need to survive. It's almost like you're part of a secret club where you learn by trial and error, and the payoff is huge. So yeah, Dark Souls 3 is tough, but that's the point. Next we have Batman Arkham Knight. If you're into Batman even a little bit, this one really delivers. It's the final entry in the Arkham series, so there's a lot riding on it. And let me tell you, it wraps things up in the most satisfying way. First off, the gameplay. You're not just playing as Batman, you're feeling like Batman. The fluid combat, the way you can string together attacks, counters, gadgets. It's all so smooth. Honestly, once you get the hang of it, you feel like a superhero, effortlessly taking down waves of thugs. It's like the perfect balance of tactical and badass. And then there's Gotham City. I mean, this is the Gotham I've always imagined. The atmosphere is spot on. Rain pouring down, neon lights reflecting off the streets, all with that dark, brooding vibe. It's eerie, but alive, if that makes sense. The city feels like it's its own character. Plus, the freedom to glide through the skyline or hop in the Batmobile just makes you feel like you own the place. Speaking of the Batmobile, I know people have mixed feelings about it, but come on, it's the freaking Batmobile. The controls can be a bit clunky at first, but once you get used to it, it's pretty fun blasting through the streets or shifting into battle mode. It adds a new dimension to the game, especially with those tank battles, even though they can get repetitive after a while. The story is where Arkham Knight really shines for me. Without spoiling too much, it's got everything. A psychological thriller, action-packed moments, and that emotional depth you wouldn't expect from a superhero game. You really get into Bruce Wayne's head. Next we have Ghost of Tsushima. From the moment you start playing, it just feels like you're stepping into this beautifully crafted world. The first thing that really grabbed me was the landscape. The island of Tsushima is stunning, with these rolling hills, forests, and temples scattered all around. And the way the wind guides you instead of using a mini-map. That was such a cool touch. It makes you feel like you're part of the world, not just playing a game. The combat is another thing that I couldn't stop thinking about. It's so fluid and satisfying. At first I was a bit nervous because samurai combat can be tricky, but the way it's designed here feels so intuitive. You switch between stances depending on who you're fighting, and it just flows so well. Every sword fight feels like it has weight. There were times when I would stop and challenge a group of enemies to a standoff, just because it felt so epic. You literally feel like a samurai. Speaking of feeling like a samurai, the story really pulls you in. It's all about Jin Sakai and his struggle between upholding the samurai code and doing what needs to be done to save his people. It gets you thinking, you know? Like, what would you do in his shoes? Would you stick to the rules or adapt to survive? The game really leans into that inner conflict, and I found myself getting attached to Jin and the other characters, especially his uncle. The emotional moments hit hard, and let's not forget the duels. Oh man, the duels. Some of the most intense moments in the game for sure. You face off against these really skilled enemies, and it's just you, them, and your sword. Next we have A Plague Tale Requiem. It absolutely should have been in the running for Game of the Year, but didn't quite get the recognition it deserved. This sequel took everything great about A Plague Tale Innocence and cranked it up to a whole new level. The story, the characters, the visuals, it was all so much more intense. And honestly, it hit harder than a lot of people expected. First off, the story in Requiem was a gut punch in the best way. Following Amisha and Hugo's journey through a world ravaged by the plague and the supernatural rat infestation, you could feel the stakes growing as you progressed. What really stood out was the emotional weight of the game. It wasn't just about survival. It was about family, loss, and the lengths you'd go to protect the ones you love. The character development for both Amisha and Hugo was top tier. And by the end, it was impossible not to be emotionally invested in their fate. The game also looked absolutely stunning. The environments were jaw-dropping, whether you were sneaking through crumbling ruins, lush countrysides, or the plague-infested streets. The attention to detail made the world feel alive. Well, as alive as a world overrun by millions of rats can feel. And speaking of the rats, Requiem took the swarming rat mechanic from the first game and made it even crazier. The way they used light and shadow to control and avoid the rats created some of the most tense, nail-biting moments in the game. Another thing to consider is that Requiem came out in 2022, which was a year dominated by games like Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok. Next we have The Witcher 3. It's one of those games that just sticks with you. I mean, where do you even start with a game like this? For me, it's the world, you know? Like, when you're roaming through those dense forests, or just riding Roach across a field at sunset, there's this vibe that's hard to describe. The world feels so alive, even if it's grim and full of monsters. And you know how in a lot of games, side quests are just filler? Not here. The Witcher 3's side quests feel just as important as the main story, if not sometimes more interesting. Like, you could be hunting down a werewolf one minute, and the next, you're getting involved in the political affairs of some random village. Every quest feels like it has its own little narrative arc. It's like playing through mini-stories, all packed into this huge world. One of my favorite things, though, is how the game handles monsters. It's not just about swinging your sword around. There's actual strategy involved. You read up on your target, learn its weaknesses, and prepare the right potions or oils before diving into battle. It really makes you feel like you're Geralt, this professional monster hunter who knows what he's doing. But it's not just about the scenery. The characters, man. You've got Ciri, Yennefer, Triss. They're so well written. Every time I made decisions in the game, I actually felt like they mattered. I mean, how often do you get that in games? Honestly, every time I play The Witcher 3, I catch something new. A bit of dialogue, a small detail in the environment. There's just so much packed into it. Next we have Ryse, Son of Rome. You know, when I first fired up Ryse, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. I'd heard mixed things over the years, but it really surprised me in a lot of good ways. Right from the start, the visuals pulled me in. I mean, this game is stunning. The world of ancient Rome looks so alive, from the grand architecture to the battlefields dripping with atmosphere. It's one of those games where you can just stop and admire the scenery. But Ryse isn't just about looking pretty. The combat, while simple, is incredibly satisfying. Yeah, it's not the most complex system out there, but once you get into the rhythm of sword swings, dodges, and finishing moves, it feels epic. There's a real sense of power behind each blow, and the slow-motion finishers, pure cinematic brilliance. It made me feel like a gladiator, right in the thick of battle. The story, too, deserves some praise. Marius Titus, the game's protagonist, has a journey that's as much about personal revenge as it is about the fate of Rome itself. The way the narrative unfolds keeps you invested. And let's not forget the voice acting. It's top-notch, really bringing the characters and drama to life. One of the coolest things about Ryse is how it captures the brutal reality of Roman warfare. You can tell the developers paid attention to detail, especially in the way soldiers fought and how battles were choreographed. There's something genuinely immersive about leading your troops through a formation, calling out orders, and fighting alongside them. It adds this sense of scale and leadership. Next we have Elden Ring. If you love a good challenge and want to lose yourself in a beautifully crafted world, this game is a must-play. The open-world design is just jaw-dropping. It's not your typical open world where you're just running from quest marker to quest marker. In Elden Ring, exploration feels so organic. You'll be wandering through this desolate field, and suddenly you'll stumble upon some hidden cave or a massive fortress in the distance, and you just have to go check it out. Every corner of the world feels alive with mystery, danger, and treasures waiting to be uncovered. The game doesn't hold your hand at all, which I love. There's no obvious path to follow. You just go wherever your curiosity takes you. It's refreshing to play a game where the world itself is the real draw, not just the quest or the story. You never know what you'll run into, and trust me, the surprises are both thrilling and terrifying. Combat, as you'd expect from a From Software game, is tough but fair. Every enemy can mess you up if you're not careful. But when you finally take down that huge boss after hours of struggling, the sense of accomplishment is so worth it. It's got that classic risk-reward system, where you're constantly weighing your decisions. Do you keep pushing forward with low health, risking all your runes, or do you play it safe and return to a site of grace? That tension makes every encounter feel meaningful. The bosses? Oh man, they're something else. Each one feels like a huge event. Some are these towering, monstrous creatures, while others are more human-sized, but just as deadly. Next we have Alan Wake 2. If you played the first game, you probably already know how trippy things can get, but this sequel, it cranks up that eerie, psychological horror vibe to a whole new level. It's like being stuck in a thriller novel that keeps messing with your head. And I mean that in the best possible way. So, right off the bat, the atmosphere in this game is incredible. Every location feels drenched in mystery and dread. Whether you're walking through dark forests, creepy small towns, or abandoned buildings, there's this constant tension in the air, like something's always lurking just out of sight. It's not just about jump scares, though. It's that slow, creeping sense of unease that really gets under your skin. The game does such a good job of making you feel like you're never truly safe. The story? Man, it's deep. It's a blend of supernatural horror, psychological thriller, and just straight-up weirdness. You're dealing with Alan's mind unraveling, and reality itself starts to bend and twist around you. There are moments where you're not sure what's real, what's in his head, or what's being written into existence. It's this constant mind game that keeps you hooked. And what I love is how the game doesn't spoon-feed you answers. You're piecing together this puzzle, and it feels so satisfying when things click, or get even weirder. Combat is another high point. The whole flashlight and gun mechanic from the first game is back, but it's more refined this time around. You're constantly managing light and darkness, using your flashlight to weaken enemies before finishing them off. Next we have Bloodborne. It absolutely deserved to win Game of the Year in 2015, but didn't quite get the crown. I mean, this game was From Software at its peak, delivering an intense gothic nightmare of a world that fans still rave about to this day. It's wild to think that something this groundbreaking didn't take home the big award. First off, the atmosphere in Bloodborne? Unreal. Yharnam was this dark, twisted, Victorian city filled with werewolves, cosmic horrors, and nightmare creatures that just kept you on edge the entire time. The design of the world was so hauntingly beautiful, with that classic From Software touch, where every alley and hidden path had a story to tell. The game didn't hold your hand either, which was part of its charm. You had to figure everything out on your own, from the lore to the mechanics. And let's talk about that combat system. Bloodborne took the typical slow, methodical Souls formula and made it fast and aggressive. You couldn't just hang back and wait. The game literally rewarded you for going on the offense with that regain system. If you got hit, you had a window to hit back and regain your health, which encouraged players to stay in the fight instead of running away. It was like Dark Souls on adrenaline. But here's the thing, Bloodborne came out the same year as The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, and that's where things get tricky. The Witcher 3 swept most of the awards that year, and while it was undoubtedly a great game, a lot of people felt like Bloodborne was overshadowed because of that. But for those who played it, Bloodborne was a masterpiece. Next we have It Takes Two. It's easily one of the most creative co-op experiences I've ever played. From the very start, you realize that it's not your typical platformer. It's all about teamwork. Whether you're playing with a friend, partner, or even someone you just met, the whole experience becomes this shared journey that's honestly so much fun. The level design is incredible. Every single level is packed with unique mechanics that are specific to that environment. 1 minute, you're in a garden where one player's watering plants while the other's chopping through obstacles. The next, you're in a clock tower, messing with time itself. It's never repetitive because each new area throws something different at you. The gameplay just keeps evolving. One of my favorite sections was when one of us could fly on this paper airplane while the other navigated obstacles on the ground. It's all about trust and coordination. What I also really appreciate is how the game balances difficulty. It's not too hard, but it does require you to think and communicate. There were moments where my co-op partner and I would be stuck for a minute, but it always felt rewarding when we figured it out together. You're constantly learning how to rely on each other's strengths, which is such a fun way to approach co-op. Honestly, what really stands out to me about It Takes Two is just how much fun it is. I mean, you're not just playing a game, you're sharing this experience with someone else, and you're both equally important to making it through the story. Whether you're laughing at the absurd situations or getting a little competitive with the mini-games sprinkled throughout, trust me, the mini-games are addictive. Next we have Gears 5. Even if you're new to the Gears series, trust me, Gears 5 is an amazing place to jump in. It's got everything you'd want in a blockbuster game, great characters, intense firefights, and a world that's equal parts beautiful and brutal. The combat in Gears 5 feels incredibly smooth, and every gunfight has that intense, cover-based strategy that makes Gears so satisfying. Popping out from cover, landing that perfect headshot, or getting up close and personal with the Lancer's chainsaw never gets old. There's something just downright satisfying about how combat feels here. Each weapon has a unique kick to it, so you're never just mindlessly firing away. It's all about timing and positioning. Plus, with the addition of Jack, your handy little drone buddy, you get some new abilities that mix things up in fun ways. He can cloak you, zap enemies, and even fetch items, so he's a true lifesaver in tight spots. And let's take a second to appreciate the world. Gears 5 introduces these open-world sections where you can explore on this sweet vehicle called the Skiff. Just zipping across the snowy tundra or the desert sands is a vibe all on its own. The world feels alive and dynamic, with lots of cool, hidden places to discover. It's not exactly a fully open world, but it's enough to let you roam around and soak in the atmosphere, and it really breaks up the action nicely. You're not just going from one big fight to the next. You actually have time to breathe, explore, and take in some amazing views. The story here actually has some serious depth. Next we have Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This game is like every Star Wars fan's dream come to life. Seriously, if you've ever imagined wielding a lightsaber, dodging blaster shots, or facing off against terrifying Sith enemies, Fallen Order is the game for you. It just pulls you in and makes you feel like a Jedi in training, and it's just so much fun. This game takes you all over the Star Wars galaxy, from lush forests to crumbling ancient ruins, and everything in between. Each planet has its own feel, its own mysteries, and its own set of enemies and challenges. There's this amazing sense of adventure as you move from planet to planet, uncovering secrets, exploring caves, and finding new paths. And the level design is a blast. It's got that classic Metroidvania vibe, where you keep discovering new abilities that let you access areas you couldn't reach before. You're constantly rewarded for exploring and backtracking, which just makes the whole journey so satisfying. Swinging a lightsaber in Fallen Order feels right. There's a weight to it, and when you deflect a blaster bolt back at a stormtrooper, pure joy. The combat strikes this perfect balance between fun and challenging. It's not button mashing. You actually have to time your attacks, parries, and dodges to succeed, which makes every encounter feel intense and meaningful. Plus, as you go along, you get to customize your lightsaber. You can pick different colors, hilts, and other parts to make it feel like your weapon, which is just such a cool touch. Fallen Order has an incredible story that feels like it could totally be its own Star Wars movie. Next we have Little Nightmares 2. From the moment you step into its eerie, twisted world, you know you're in for a wild ride. If you enjoyed the first game, this one takes everything that made Little Nightmares so great and cranks it up a notch. The atmosphere is even more disturbing, the puzzles are more challenging, and the story, while still cryptic, pulls you deeper into this unsettling nightmare realm. You play as Mono, a new character, but you're not alone. 6, The protagonist from the first game is there with you, and having that companion dynamic adds a new layer to the gameplay. It's cool how the game makes you rely on each other to get through the twisted environments. You'll need to work together to solve puzzles, escape enemies, and navigate the nightmarish world around you. It's not a co-op game, but that teamwork element feels fresh and gives you a stronger emotional connection to the characters. The world in Little Nightmares 2 is just as unsettling as you'd expect. It's full of grotesque, distorted creatures that'll send shivers down your spine. The design of the enemies is one of the game's strongest points. Each one is creepier than the last, and the way they move and interact with the environment keeps you on edge the whole time. There's a constant feeling of being hunted, which makes every encounter feel tense and nerve-wracking. What's really great about the game is how it balances those intense chase scenes with quieter, more atmospheric moments. You'll go from heart-pounding sequences where you're being chased by terrifying enemies to quieter, eerie sections where you're just trying to figure out what's going on. Next we have The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. From the very beginning, you're dropped into this massive open world, and it's completely up to you what to do next. No hand-holding, no strict path, just pure, unfiltered exploration. One of the coolest things about Breath of the Wild is the sense of freedom. You see a mountain way off in the distance? You can climb it. You spot a random little forest on your way to a shrine? Go explore it. You might find a secret or even stumble on a side quest. And the game rewards you for being curious. Everywhere you go, there's something hidden, some surprise, some little detail that makes you feel like the developers thought of everything. And speaking of surprises, the physics and chemistry systems in this game are unreal. You can use the environment to solve puzzles in ways that feel totally unique to you. Like, if you're clever enough, you can create crazy solutions to puzzles that don't even feel right. But the game encourages that. You can even use metal weapons to attract lightning during storms or set grass on fire to create updrafts for your glider. It's like a sandbox that's just begging you to mess around and get creative. And let's not forget the combat. It's challenging, but in a really rewarding way. You don't just mindlessly hack and slash. You need to time your dodges, be aware of your surroundings, and think about your strategy. The weapon durability system is a hot topic, but honestly, it adds to that survival feel. You're encouraged to experiment with different weapons and tactics, which keeps things interesting. Next we have Sekiro. I went in this game expecting something similar to Dark Souls, but nope. Sekiro has its own thing going on. It's all about timing, parrying, and mastering patience. You can't just hack your way through this one, but when you finally land that perfect parry or take down a boss that's been wrecking you, it's the most satisfying feeling ever. The combat is so tight and precise. I love how it's focused more on skill than stats. Every fight feels like a proper duel, especially with that posture system. Instead of just slashing away, you're breaking down their defense to land that killer blow. It's a challenge, but man, when you get the rhythm down, it's amazing. And that grappling hook, dude, it's such a game changer. You feel like a legit ninja, zipping around trees, rooftops, and sneaking up on enemies from above. I can't count how many times it saved me from getting killed. It just makes exploring the world way more fun. Speaking of the world, the whole setting in feudal Japan is stunning. The environments are so detailed, from peaceful bamboo forests to war-torn castles. Every area has this mysterious beauty to it. And as you explore, you start piecing together the lore, which is so From Software in the best way. Now, I won't lie. Sekiro is hard. It can be brutal, but in a good way. I've died more times than I care to admit, but each death feels like a lesson. You can't just rush in. You've got to learn your enemy's moves, find their patterns, and perfect your timing. And when you do, it's like reaching some kind of gamer zen. Next we have The Evil Within 2. If you've played the first one, you know it's already got that creepy, nightmarish vibe. But this sequel, it takes things to a whole new level. How it blends open-world elements with that tight, survival horror tension. You've got more freedom to explore this time, but it never feels too safe. Even in the open areas, there's this constant sense of dread, like something could jump out at you at any moment. And trust me, the game knows how to play with your nerves. The enemies in this game are wild. Some of the creature designs are just pure nightmare fuel, like that multi-limbed thing guardian. Still gives me the creeps just thinking about it. And don't even get me started on the bosses. Every encounter feels intense and nerve-wracking, especially since resources are still pretty scarce. You've got to be smart about when to fight and when to sneak around. The open areas give you more options for how to approach situations, which I really liked. Sometimes it felt satisfying to sneak by enemies unnoticed, and other times you'd have no choice but to go guns blazing. The game forces you to be adaptable. The story is solid too. It's got that psychological horror aspect that really messes with your head, but it also wraps up a lot of the loose ends from the first game in a satisfying way. And I've got to say, there are some twists in there that genuinely shocked me. It's not just about the scares, it's a good narrative experience too. And of course, the crafting system is back, so you can make your own ammo and gear, which really adds to that survival feel. Next we have Sifu. What's crazy about Sifu is how brutal it can be. I mean, you're this martial artist out for revenge, and the combat system is so fluid, but also super challenging. It's not the kind of game where you can just mash buttons, but the real twist? The aging mechanic. Every time you die, your character ages, and it changes how you play. As you get older, you hit harder but lose health. It's such a clever way to keep the tension high. You're constantly trying to balance staying alive while still taking risks. There's this internal struggle like, do I push through this fight now, or should I retreat and try again later? The more you age, the fewer chances you have to finish your mission, which makes every death feel meaningful. The level design is awesome too. You're moving through these beautifully crafted environments, from neon-lit nightclubs to serene temples. Each one feels like a love letter to classic kung fu movies. The game's art style is sleek and minimal, but the environments are so detailed, and the atmosphere is on point. You really feel like you're living out this martial arts epic. What I also loved is how Sifu doesn't hold your hand. The difficulty can be punishing, but in a way that makes you want to get better. It's all about learning from your mistakes and coming back stronger. Each time you die, you're learning the enemy's patterns, figuring out new strategies. It's got that Dark Souls vibe where every failure is a lesson. If you love a good challenge and want to experience some of the best hand-to-hand combat in gaming, Sifu is a must-play. Next we have Forza Horizon 5. Even if you're not a racing game person, trust me, you'll still find something to love here. It's like a love letter to cars, exploration, and just having a good time behind the wheel. Remember when you used to race toy cars around your living room, making up little adventures as you went? Forza Horizon 5 brings that same energy, but cranks it up to 11. It's not just about winning races, though that's fun too. It's about playing. The freedom you have to do whatever you want is amazing. They've got everything from souped-up classics to hypercars that look like they belong in a sci-fi movie. And the customization. You can tweak everything. Paint jobs, performance, even little decals. It's like a car nerd's dream come true. But don't worry, you don't have to be a gearhead to enjoy it. The game does a great job of keeping things accessible, whether you're a casual player or a hardcore racer. The controls are just buttery smooth, and the way each car handles feels unique. Want to go off-roading in a big, beefy truck? Go for it. Prefer zipping through city streets in a sleek sports car? Done. It's not just racing, it's an experience. And the best part? You don't even have to race if you don't want to. There are stunt challenges, speed traps, exploration events. It's like a big automotive playground. And the seasonal changes? Genius. The world evolves over time. So one week you might be racing in dry deserts, and the next you're dealing with torrential rain. It keeps things fresh and gives you an excuse to keep coming back. Next we have Warhammer Space Marine 2. Honestly, I had pretty high expectations going in, especially since I loved the first game. But this one really blew me away. I just finished it, and I'm still buzzing with adrenaline. If you're into anything Warhammer or just a fan of solid, brutal action games, this one hits all the right notes. Right from the start, I was hooked. You jump back into the boots of Captain Titus, and let me tell you, they've cranked everything up. Titus feels like an absolute force of nature, and the game really nails that power fantasy of being a space marine. Every time I smashed into a group of Tyranids, it felt like I was carving through them like a god of war. And these Tyranids are terrifying. The way they swarm you, it's a mix of pure chaos and strategic survival. Speaking of strategy, the game's combat is deeper than it looks at first. Sure, you can charge in swinging that chainsword and ripping through enemies, but you've got to think a bit too. You can't just button mash your way to victory, especially with those massive bosses. They've got these intricate patterns, so it feels like a dance between brute force and tactical moves. When I finally took down one of the bigger enemies after like 15 minutes of dodging and countering, it was such a satisfying moment. I felt like I earned that victory. And the story is more than just a mindless shooter, that's for sure. There are moments where the weight of war, the cost of being a space marine, really hit. Titus's arc feels more fleshed out this time around. He's not just a badass in power armor, but a character you actually care about. Next we have Marvel's Spider-Man 2. If you loved the first two games, get ready to have your mind blown, because this sequel takes everything up a notch. It's got all the web-swinging, action-packed, open-world goodness from the first game, but with some seriously awesome upgrades that make you feel even more like Spidey. First off, swinging through New York again? Man, I could do that for hours. The way they've refined the web-swinging mechanics is just so smooth. You're gliding through the city, flipping between skyscrapers, and pulling off crazy mid-air tricks. There's this new web glider thing that lets you cover so much ground so fast. It's like Spidey's flying, and it's the best feeling when you're cruising over Central Park or zipping through tight alleyways. It makes you feel unstoppable, and you'll never want to use fast travel. And this time, you get to switch between Peter and Miles, which is a game changer. Both of them have their own fighting styles and unique abilities, so it never feels repetitive. Peter's got his classic gadgets, but now he's also rocking those symbiote powers that just feel brutal. You can really feel the strength when he's using them. It's like he's just tearing through enemies. And then you've got Miles, who's all about that flashy Venom energy. I loved how you could seamlessly switch between them, depending on the mission or just how you wanted to play. The combat, too, has been seriously upgraded. It's fast, fluid, and makes you feel like you're choreographing these epic battles. You're pulling off these crazy combos, switching between gadgets, and using your environment to take down enemies in the most creative ways possible. Next we have Silent Hill 2 Remake. I've got to say, it totally nails that eerie, unsettling vibe that made the original such a classic. I mean, Silent Hill 2 is already one of the most iconic horror games out there, but this remake, it's like they took all the stuff that creeped us out back in the day and cranked it up with these incredible graphics and sound design. The foggy town of Silent Hill looks absolutely gorgeous in this remake. Well, in a terrifying, twisted way, of course. The way the fog moves, the way the shadows creep along the streets, it's so atmospheric. Walking through those empty, run-down streets, you can just feel the tension building. I caught myself hesitating before turning corners, just bracing for whatever nightmare was waiting around the bend. The monsters are just insane. Pyramid Head is back, and just as horrifying as ever. Seeing him in high definition? Yeah, it gave me chills. And the sound design makes it even worse. In the best way. You'll hear these distant, unsettling noises, and it just puts you on edge the entire time. The sound of the radio static kicking in right before a monster appears still gets me every time. What I also love is how faithful the remake is to the original, but it also adds some nice quality of life improvements. The controls feel smoother. The combat is a little more refined, but it still keeps that you're not some action hero vibe. Every encounter with a monster feels dangerous, like you're barely scraping by, which is exactly what you want in a horror game like this. If you're into survival horror at all, or if you loved the original, you've got to check this out. Next we have Ghost Recon Wildlands. It's one of those games that kind of slipped under the radar for a lot of people, but honestly, it's so much fun once you get into it. I mean, the sheer scale of the open world is wild. Bolivia is your playground, and you can literally go anywhere. I remember the first time I jumped in a helicopter and just flew over this huge mountain range, seeing the sprawling landscape below. It's kind of breathtaking, even for an older game. The thing that really stands out, though, is how flexible the gameplay is. You've got this whole squad with you, and you can approach missions in so many different ways. If you're feeling tactical, you can scout out an area with your drone, mark enemies, and silently pick them off one by one. Or you can just go in guns blazing and let the chaos unfold. And I love that both options work. There's no one way to play it. And man, playing co-op with friends, that's where it gets really fun. There's nothing quite like coordinating an attack with your buddies, where everyone's got their role. One person's sniping, another's on the ground sneaking in, and then you're calling in air support. It just makes you feel like a real squad. Of course, it doesn't always go according to plan, and when everything falls apart, it turns into this hilarious mess of trying to escape or salvage the mission. But that's part of the charm, right? I also appreciate how the game doesn't take itself too seriously. Sure, it's got this gritty cartel storyline, but the characters crack jokes, and there are these moments of levity that break up the intensity. The only downside? I guess some missions can get a bit repetitive if you're playing solo for too long. Next we have Titanfall 2. If you haven't jumped into this game yet, you're in for a treat because it's one of those rare shooters that nails everything from movement to story. You're not just running and gunning here. Titanfall 2 turns you into a parkour expert, with wall running, double jumping, and slides that let you weave through the battlefield like a pro. The controls are smooth, and once you get the hang of it, it's hard to go back to other games. The map designs are built around this movement too, encouraging you to think creatively about how to get from point A to point B. There's something so satisfying about stringing together a perfect series of moves to outmaneuver enemies, and every match feels like you're pulling off action movie stunts. And then there are the Titans. If you ever wanted to pilot a giant mech, Titanfall 2 makes that dream come true. The game balances your time between playing as a pilot, the fast, agile soldier, and then calling down your Titan, which adds this completely new layer to the gameplay. Titans are powerful, heavy-hitting, and give you this awesome sense of being a walking tank. But it's not just a button mash fest. Every Titan has unique abilities and weapons, so there's actually a good bit of strategy involved. One thing that really stands out in Titanfall 2 is the campaign. Now, I know campaigns in first-person shooters can sometimes feel like a warm-up for multiplayer, but here it's a full experience on its own. It's well-paced, exciting, and even throws in some surprises that keep things fresh.